This particular RimWorld was once home to a prosperous civilization with dozens of megacities strewn across the continent. Each one was home to hundreds of millions of citizens. That time has long passed, and that civilization has been all but wiped from the archives of the Ordo Historia. The only thing that remains of their civilization is a handful of writings in the ruins of their ancient cities. A group of wealthy Glitterworld historians, independent of the Ordo Historia, hired a crew to explore one of the ruined cities and bring back anything that could help piece together the story of their downfall. After the results of that expedition, the historians decided to expand the project by sending a new team to reclaim a portion of the city and rebuild it to its once former glory. Exactly what the original expedition found is unknown to our colonists, but they've been assured that everything there is perfectly safe. Other than the toxic waste, of course. But a little toxic waste never stopped RimWorld settlers. Just a quick note before we jump all the way in. As I make more of these videos, I find myself leaning further and further into the story side and less the gameplay side. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy this more story narrative focused style, or if you prefer a more gameplay focused narrative, or a more even mix between the two. Also, just a quick friendly reminder that if you become a member on the channel, you'll get early access to all videos that get uploaded on the channel, including each new episode of this series. You can find a link for more information about membership down in the description of the video. Anyway, let's get back to it. After landing in the city, the colonists opened a comms link via a relay satellite high in orbit. They reported back that they had arrived safely and would soon begin an establishment of an outpost that they would use to further explore the city. It would take several quadrants before that message would arrive at its destination. At that point, the first waves of new colonists would already have been sent to further increase the settlement of the area. Until those new colonists arrived, these folks were on their own. They began construction on the first building that would serve as the beginning of their home, and ultimately as the headquarters of the reclamation process. Voss was hired for the mission as security, but he's also been forced into the role of providing the bulk of the manual labor, something he is deeply resentful of given his professional experience. Normally, he wouldn't have accepted a contract like this, but the payment the historians offered was just too enticing to pass up. Now that he's in the ruined city and piecing together beds, he's beginning to feel a bit differently about things. But it's too late to go back now. One of their first objectives is to begin producing stone blocks for construction. Most of the city was built out of stone already, given the availability of rock in the area, and the limited iron for steel production. Most of the iron had already been dug up by the city's inhabitants previously. The first structure was finished with what steel they could salvage to try to provide initial protection from the elements, at least until stone production could begin. How the city was destroyed is uncertain, but they do know the toxic fallout from the event still remains to this day, and they have to take steps to protect themselves as best as they can. Unfortunately, the expedition financiers failed to provide personal safety equipment to the crew, so they're forced to take their safety into their own hands. Let's take a look at the backgrounds of our characters. First, we have Ryan Wilson, aka Wilson the Pigskin. As a child, he was a faithful student and was dedicated to learning anything and everything he could about humanity and its creations. While he was shunned as a nerd, he didn't mind. He hoped for a brighter future. As an adult, he joined his nation's military. His job was to fix and build anything he could get his hands on, from living people to machines and mechs. Surely he was fixing the people and building the mechs, not vice versa. He was sent into dangerous areas. He never had a problem saving soldiers' lives and building the tech and machines needed to win. Hopefully he'll prove to be a valuable asset to the colonization effort. Then there's Jessie Herman. Born a baseline human, but genetically modified in her childhood by the elders of her bunker to make her more suited to her assigned role. The bunker she grew up in was deep beneath a toxic world, which would ultimately give her the experience the historians were looking for when choosing the team. As an adult, she was assigned the role of machinist within her isolated society. She became obsessed with old machines and arcane pieces of technology. She obtained them whenever she could and loved taking them apart to see how they worked. She'll be the backbone of the technical aspect of the colonization effort. Next up we have Tanya Mann. She grew up addicted to reading. She'd spend all day in her local library with her nose in a book. When budget cuts forced the library to close, Tanya was distraught. She decided to fill the gap by writing her own stories instead. Her thirst for adventure grew as she wrote, and ultimately led her to join her planet's naval defense force, hoping it would lead her to distant planets and unimaginable experiences. She rose through the ranks until she qualified for the Space Marines. After extensive training, she was deployed with a squad of Marines assigned to board and assault vessels operating as pirates in her local cluster. Unfortunately, there was no adventure and little excitement, and nothing that took her far from the planet, so after her contract expired, instead of continuing her military life, she opted to find work in the private sector, which ultimately brought her here. And then we have Estelle English. She was a sickly child suffering from a rare disease. She spent most of her childhood quarantined in a hospital, and because of this, she experienced almost no human contact other than the brief moments with the medical staff. This made her awkward and abrasive with people, but it did give her a lifelong love of medicine and science. She pursued this passion into adulthood, furthering her education and ultimately landing a role managing a leisure biosphere. The work was mostly done by robots, but it did give her an understanding of the rise and fall of interacting ecosystems, making her a perfect addition to this mission. And lastly, we have Vaska Nemor, also known as Voss. He wasn't born like a normal human. He was genetically modified as a fetus and grown in a vat to be a cold-hearted killer. He was bred to have no emotion, no feelings, and no care for who lives and who dies. However, everything didn't go exactly to plan. The researchers who created him ultimately lost control of their experiment and he escaped. Knowing no other skills, he took what he did know and put it to use joining a crew of mercenaries. They were mostly hired for violence and death, but they were occasionally hired on for the more mundane protection jobs. This contract was supposed to be one of those mundane protection jobs, but in the end turned out to be anything but that. Before arriving, the team did not have much opportunity to get to know one another. They were removed from cryptosleep only to be immediately loaded onto the shuttle and sent down to the planet. At this point, they're essentially strangers to one another. Man was put in charge of the mission, amidst much disagreement about a military-minded individual being put in charge of the operational end. Several of the historians preferred English to be in charge, given the underlying academic nature of the mission. But given what happened to the initial expedition, the military-minded historians won the day, and Man was left to make the decisions once on the planet's surface. Whether or not she would be able to successfully handle the rest of the colonists will have to be determined. The crew has been hard at work establishing a foothold to be used as headquarters. The stonecutter is ready, and most of the food has been brought inside. They're going to have to start cutting stone for expansion as soon as they can in order to further expand the base. They also need to focus on getting as much food growing as possible. This place certainly is not well suited for agriculture, but there are still small areas of soil that are still arable. They'll focus mostly on growing rice and potatoes in small patches until they can establish hydroponic growing tables. Before then, they're going to have to live off these survival meals that were packed inside the landing shuttle. Now that they've had a moment to sit down and converse, they've begun to learn a little bit about one another. Although they had never met before, during their conversation, Wilson and Man discovered that they were actually from the same planet and served in the same military. Wilson serving in the ground forces and Man in the orbital navy. Learning that was enough to instantly form a bond between them. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the others amongst the crew. English already found a gap forming between herself and the others with her abrasive attitude, and Voss held nothing but contempt for the others, causing him to already begin to distance himself from everyone else. But back to the objective at hand. The crew needs to focus on getting that food growth started. There is a patch of soil immediately adjacent to where they landed the shuttle that will serve well for a beginning plot of rice. It won't be enough to feed them entirely, but it will at least get them started. While English was out sowing the first rows of rice, a terrifying growl was heard from the ruins to the west. Voss was the first to respond with a shotgun as a diseased panther charged towards English. He landed the first shot and managed to slow it down just enough for Wilson and Man to charge out to assist. The first threat was dealt with, but it certainly will not be the worst of what they experience here. They inspected the corpse of the panther to discover the terrible effects this place had upon it. Its body was covered in sores and emitted a horrid stench. Without saying anything, they returned to work, each secretly wondering if the same would eventually happen to them. Just one of the many things the financiers failed to mention about this place. They are going to need more rice than what has already been planted, so let's take advantage of some of this soil to the north. It's really not in an ideal location, but it's the best they've got access to at the moment. Hopefully they can construct an exterior wall to help protect what little arable soil they have access to. While the crew was investigating the nearest ruins, they came upon several skeletal remains. They were uncertain of how they got here, but they assumed it must have been the remnants of the ancient inhabitants of the city from the times before its downfall. English knew better, given the time frame, but kept the information to herself. Little did they know, these were actually the remains of the previous expedition sent by the Glitterworld historians. None from that expedition returned, and all that was left was a communication received months after their demise about the current state of the ruined city. Given these circumstances, the historians still decided to send this new crew to establish the colony. Man ordered Voss to go out and dig a grave for each of the skeletons they discovered, 8 in total. Reluctantly, he agreed, and he spent the rest of the morning digging. It only took him just over an hour, and then, with the help of Wilson, they set to burying each. After a brief moment for remembrance, they returned to work. Meanwhile, they've been slowly tearing apart the shuttle to use as resources for the base. The plan is to stay here permanently, so there's no need for a shuttle anymore. The interior has all been ripped out, and now the walls can be taken down. After that, the floor will be removed, and they'll have plenty of steel for their electricity project. English and Herman worked late into the night researching battery tech. You'd think that they would have arrived knowing how to set up a battery, but nope, they had to look it up in the manual. The Great Big Guide to RimWorld Colonization. Never start an expedition without a copy. It can be a lifesaver. Meanwhile, Voss spent his evening installing concrete floors. It's not entirely clear how he managed to pour concrete in a fully furnished room, under the shelves and everything. Somehow he got the work done. They managed to get battery tech done fairly quickly. Now it's just a matter of getting a solar panel built and a battery installed. That's going to have to be the next project. Voss set to taking down the remaining walls of the shuttle. Now all that remains is that floor. Well, there's definitely no chance of escaping now. Not that there ever was. Now the battery is finished being built, but they don't actually have the power generator yet. Instead of building a solar panel, they've decided to take a break from work and have a bit of a party. It's a celebration for completing their first milestone, which marks the end of Stage 1. It looks like Man and Wilson are already growing closer and started to flirt with one another. It'll be interesting to see if that goes anywhere. After the party, Voss has gone back to work tearing out the rest of the shuttle floor. During that, there is a bit of discussion on what they should call this place. It was originally called Common City, and they decided not to change it. And they've also decided to stick with the original project name, Common City Reclamation. That's simple enough. They've already started construction on the next building. It's going to serve as the first dining hall of the colony. They can continue using the first building as a barracks and recreation room for now, but eventually, that will get moved over into the new structure. For now, they're going to have to live on nutrient paste. This place isn't exactly overflowing with food. Until it is, they're going to have to stretch their resources as far as they can. Perhaps once they've built a few hydroponics tables, then they can discuss upgrading to better meals. They still haven't constructed a power source. That's going to have to be addressed as soon as possible. A wind turbine would work, but they have all this chem fuel sitting around from the ship. May as well make use of what they have. They're going to go with the chem fuel generator to start with, then build a couple solar panels and keep the chem fuel generator for emergencies only. Alright, the chem fuel generator is running, and already they've got the solar panel going. Well, the wildlife is getting aggressive again. So far, other than the toxified soil, the wildlife has been the only major threat the colonists have faced. If that continues, life here might not be as difficult as they imagined. If only they had any clue at all of the terrible things that this place had in store for them. They weren't warned about the many boghounds that live and breed throughout the ruins of the city. The hounds run in packs and are not afraid of human beings like their smaller cousins. One by itself isn't terribly dangerous, but a group of those things can be rather lethal. Now that that is dealt with, it's time to get back to the current objective of getting a new dining hall fully functional. They can move those tables over so they can at least start eating here. After that, they're going to need a floor installed, and sooner or later, they'll need to move the recreation over, try to make the most of what they can out of this room. Now that the dining room is at least usable, the next thing that needs to be finished is the freezer. Since they're not going to be able to produce much food, what food they do produce needs to be saved and stored as long as possible. So the freezer is going to be an absolute necessity. Alright, there we go. The AC is done. Now they just need to finish the conduit and connect it to the battery. In the process of all of that, another boghound is charged. This time towards Man. These things are relentless. Man ran for the safety of the outpost. Voss and Wilson were already there waiting with their shotguns. Unfortunately, harming the first one has angered the other nearby boghound, and now that one is attacking as well. Both Man and Voss took quite a bit of damage, but the hounds are dealt with. Let's hope that Scaria-ridden one doesn't spread its disease to the colonists. At least if that does happen, there's quite a few skilled medics on standby. Alright, the wounds are all tended to. Now it's time to get back to finishing this freezer. Alright, the butcher table is ready, and now they can start cutting up the hounds to turn into paste. If the boghounds are going to keep attacking over and over, the colonists may as well get what they can out of them. And just like that, already another boghound is charging. This time at Herman. They're going to have to go around and clear out the entire area of boghounds so this doesn't keep happening. It's like a continuous chain of hounds attacking at this point. Hopefully that's most of them dealt with at least. Before the temperature gets too bad here, let's install a couple of coolers. One for the barracks and one for the dining room. That way if a heat wave does set in, at least everyone will be safe. It does get awfully warm here. Most of the nearby city ruins were built out of stone, but a few of the closest ones were made out of steel. The colonists can go around and deconstruct the closest steel ones, and try to salvage any usable steel that remains. That should at least give enough steel for their next few construction projects. Oh look, another boghound. They're either going to need to establish a patrol to deal with the boghounds, or They're going to need to finish an exterior wall, create a compound that protects them from the wildlife in the area. Frankly, the latter is likely the better long-term plan. Even more rabid animals have arrived. This time it's a large group of rats that, just like the boghounds, have the scary infection. All the colonists have huddled into the dining room, secured the food, and locked the doors. All they could hear were the sounds of screeching and scratching outside the doors. But they've shut and locked the doors, so they should be safe for now. Not long after the rats, a group of traders have arrived. They're in for a bit of a surprise. There aren't any colonists waiting for them outside, but there sure are a lot of angry rats. The trader cleared out the rats, allowing the colonists to open the doors and come back out. The colonists bartered for a while with the traders and came to an agreement to trade leather and silver for wood. Now the traders have left and a pretty severe storm has rolled in. Hopefully the traders were able to avoid the boghounds and make it out of the ruins safely before this thing set in. During the storm, in between the thunder, one of the colonists heard the faint cry for help out in the distance. They hadn't the slightest clue how he got here, but Man went out to help him nonetheless. Man has a harsh exterior from her time in the orbital marines, but deep down, she's still that bright-eyed child that enjoyed adventure stories. Every once in a while, she gets to feel herself being the hero of her own story. More than ever, she felt that, dragging the survivor back to the outpost. Wilson and Man have grown closer and closer since the discovery of their shared heritage. They've started to develop deeper feelings for one another, and it's culminated into a relationship formed between the two. Wilson tried to romance her by telling a tale about makeup. That's a strange way to attract a space marine, but whatever works. The next objective for the survivors is going to be to set up a dedicated workshop. Their research speed is already rather high, but it could be better by moving all the workbenches out of the room and turning it into a laboratory. At the same time, the workshop walls can help to form a perimeter around the rice patch to help protect it a little bit. The room's a bit uneven, but that can be fixed later. Herman and English were having a peaceful conversation in the dining hall when Voss stormed in, gruff as usual. After a passing comment by English to Herman about the Edekeen's demeanor, Voss had enough and lashed out. English did not stand a chance. Voss pummeled her until she cried for mercy. English took a serious beating and Voss came out completely unscathed. He might feel a bit better after this, but it certainly won't help his reputation among the other colonists. After the run-in between English and Voss, the colonists have been reminded the importance of establishing a functional hospital. Up until now, they've been tending to cuts and scrapes in the dining room next to the generator, but that's certainly not going to work for any serious wounds or disease that might affect them. The hospital can be built here on the west side of the base. It doesn't need to be massive at the moment, but the bigger the better. Two events have happened at the exact same time. One of the wild boghounds has turned out to be much more friendly than the other vicious ones they've encountered so far. It's taken to living close to the outpost and has even begun to interact with Voss. At the same time, The budding relationship between Man and Wilson is already broken. It turns out they didn't have much in common beyond their shared military past. This might make things a bit awkward going forward. Well, at least Voss has a new friend. He doesn't really get along with anyone here, but he seems to have a soft spot for animals, especially this one. A small group of pirates have established an outpost north of the city with a device that's interfering with the electrical equipment in the base. Someone is going to have to go out and shut this thing down, or the expedition is going to come to a quick and abrupt end. Without electricity, this place simply cannot function. Man put together a small team to venture north and destroy the EMI dynamo. It's not entirely clear how the team knew exactly where the device was located, but some things out in the rim will always be a mystery. She assigned Voss and Wilson to travel north while she would remain at the outpost to both manage and defend the remaining colonists. Unfortunately, the two barely left before being assaulted by another hungry boghound. Man heard the angry yells and went out to assist. The boghound was dealt with quickly, but unfortunately, the chaos sent Wilson into a spiral. Knowing that little was going to plan was just a bit too much for Wilson. The mission being waylaid by boghounds was the final straw for him. While he was out wandering in anger, another boghound saw the lone wanderer and pounced. Voss and Man made it just in time to see Wilson being bit over and over by the boghound. They began to fire their weapons and killed the boghound before it could finish off Wilson, barely saving his life. Herman immediately got to work tending to his wounds. Nothing seems to be going to plan in this forsaken city. Now that Wilson is unconscious and in recovery, Man will have to take his place on the mission northward. Unfortunately, while they were preparing, a whispering voice began to creep into the minds of all the women in the colony. It was unclear where it was originating from, but it was clear that it was absolutely horrific. It was only now that Man began to realize that this place was abandoned for a good reason. The stress of the entire situation has taken its toll on Man, and she could handle it no longer. She snapped and began to smash things around the barracks. Luckily, the tantrum was short, and she collected herself immediately. She knew she had no choice but to remain as calm as possible. If she didn't, she knew they would all end up like the skeletons they discovered when they first arrived. Since the new hospital is unfinished, Wilson has been recovering in the dining hall. The recovery took a turn for the worst when the bite wound in his leg began to show signs of scaria rot. The smell began to permeate the room and was unbearable. Herman had never dealt with this condition before, but she did her best to tend to it with the medicine they had on hand. At first glance, the treatment appeared to be working quickly, giving some small amount of relief to everyone. Meanwhile, Man and Voss gathered supplies and once again set out to travel northward to the EMI dynamo. It took them about 4 hours of walking before they made it to the outskirts of the city ruins to the north. The ruins gave way to shrubland and gave a welcome sense of relief to the two. For Man, being away from the voice and out in the natural environment had a massive positive impact, while Voss just missed his boghound friend. It took the two about 8 hours to reach the site of the EMI dynamo. With 3 pirates defending it, their job wouldn't be easy, but at least the pirates were only equipped with knives and clubs. Two of the 3 pirates charged the duo, but they opened fire and tore down the pirates before they could close the gap. The third ran for their life, and the site was clear for Voss and Man to destroy the dynamo and return home. After the dynamo was destroyed, the two began searching the camp. Only then they realized that one of the pirates was still alive. Man felt pity and ordered Voss to pick her up and bring her back with him. Meanwhile, back at the colony, Wilson has been spending his time lying next to the warm battery, recovering from his wounds. The scarring infection has been halted. It's rather unfortunate when the medic is the one who takes such severe damage, but at least several of the other colonists have medical training, and they can jump in when something like this happens. The very next day, just after noon, Mann and Voss returned to the colony with their prisoner in tow. They hadn't learned much about the captive, but Mann had become intent on keeping her alive, finding out as much as she could about the pirates and the surrounding area. She hoped the surviving pirate would have all that information that she would need. When the two returned, Mann was warmly welcomed back. Voss, not so much. He was just happy to be back to his boghound friend. The hound gave him a lick and a nuzzle to show his excitement of a friend returning. Now Wilson was back on his feet, and the worst of the infection had passed. Hopefully he'll think twice next time before wandering around out in the untamed portions of the city. His run-in with the boghound and the new addition of a waster prisoner have been a strong reminder of the urgency of the hospital, so they've immediately set to work on construction on the walls. They started with a small room that they could keep the waster prisoner in until they could decide what to do with her over the long term. In addition, aware of the physiological dependencies faced by wasters, they set out to begin growing psychite that they might brew into a tea. It certainly wouldn't hurt to have a bit for themselves to keep productivity and moods up. Most of them, aside from Herman, enjoyed psychite tea before leaving on the mission, so having a taste at home would be a welcome change for all of them. Herman never touched the stuff. She always preferred to keep her wits and stay sober at all times, especially in a place like this. Looks like the trauma of nearly being eaten by a boghound was a bit too much for Wilson. Every time he steps outside, he's reminded that more of the beasts could potentially lurk in any of the nearby ruins. He decided to express his stress in a rather unsettling way. He dug up one of the skeletons and placed it on the table as a reminder for everyone to see. Certainly a powerful way to remind everyone of their ultimate fate. He ranted and raved that they were all going to die and ended up exactly like this person. Hoping to minimize the effects on morale, Mann quietly gathered up the bones and returned them to the grave. Hopefully Wilson would soon tire himself out and go back to work before causing a spiral to the mood of everyone around him. The room for the prisoner is finished, and Mann has begun to escort her over. The prisoner spoke a discouraging warning that they were in fact all going to die in this place. It stopped Mann in her tracks. For a moment she believed it was true, and that was just enough time for the prisoner to break her grasp and begin to run for it. Fortunately, Voss was there and quickly responded. He grabbed her before she could get away, and then quietly escorted her to her new accommodations. Well, the new hospital is going to need an air conditioner. This place gets pretty warm, and the hospital has to be kept cool for anyone recovering from heat stroke. Not to mention the prison rooms are going to need to be kept somewhat livable for anyone being temporarily held. Normally, the official procedure in this colony for any colonist breaking the primary rules is temporary detainment, until an appropriate punishment can be determined. This time, however, English made it quite clear that she believed keeping one of the, as she called them, evil little beasts around would end in their death, and the only way they could be saved was to kill them all. When she announced that she would take it upon herself to make them safe, Voss moved quickly to intervene. Wilson saw what was happening and came to help. At first they attempted to hold her back, but that quickly escalated into fists flying. Before anyone knew what was happening, English was on the ground. At least the boghound was safe. For now. While Mann was bringing food to the prisoner, she stayed for a short chat. She asked questions about the prisoner's faction, their numbers and location, and the surrounding terrain. Predictably, the prisoner was unhelpful in all regards. While this was going on, in a moment of distraction, the prisoner managed to snag a small set of keys off Mann's belt. She hid them away under the blankets and waited for the ideal moment. It only took a couple of hours for the coast to be clear. The prisoner took the opportunity, opened the door, and made a break for it. Unfortunately for her, her timing could not have been worse. She picked the exact moment when Man was walking just outside the hospital doors. The force was absolutely excessive. They're all on edge from the events that have transpired up until now, and it's starting to really show. After that, later that day, some of the colonists gathered after determining that their only hope of surviving would be to put all their faith in Man and follow her lead to the very end. She was already officially the leader of the expedition, but now most of the colonists had given their seal of approval. The only holdout was Voss, but he didn't care enough to voice his dissent beyond a disapproving grunt. For better or worse, whether they lived or died, was now entirely in the hands of Tanya Man. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for updates on all future videos. For those of you who made it all the way to the end, please consider checking out my Patreon to help support the creation of more videos like this one. You'll find the link in the description below. Thanks for watching, and see you for the next one.